Hey, what's up everyone? So in today's video, we're gonna be talking about this really cheap, fast lens for APS-C and Micro Four Thirds cameras. So the lens in question is this 7 Artisans 35mm f1.4 Mark II. So this lens is only about 80 bucks and it comes in a bunch of different mounts, Micro Four Thirds obviously, and then a bunch of mounts for the APS-C cameras like Fuji X, Sony E, and I believe Canon M. So why did I choose this lens? Well, I really wanted something that would be a good complementary lens to my DJI 15mm, with 35mm being a little more than double the focal length. And since I've had good experiences with 7 Artisans lenses before with the 25mm f1.8, I decided to go for this lens because I thought it would be a pretty good portrait / interview style lens. So as a Micro Four Thirds shooter, you might be pretty tempted to go for vintage lenses when you want to create a set of primes to use. But the problem with vintage lenses is that they're designed for 35mm film, right? So they're not really designed for Micro Four Thirds sensors, and they're just a little bit more cumbersome to use for Micro Four Thirds shooters. Whereas lenses like this were actually designed for mirrorless cameras, and they're actually designed for smaller sensors. So these can cover up to an APS-C sensor and of course Micro Four Thirds sensors. And oftentimes lenses like this can be just as inexpensive as vintage lenses, and they still give a really nice cinematic look. So this 7 Artisans 35mm is marketed as a photography lens, but in my opinion, it's actually a pretty good, cheap cinema lens. It's got a declicked aperture, which is actually pretty dampened, so you're not gonna accidentally move it. And the focus ring is really nice and smooth. It's a pretty short focus throw, but when you're focusing by hand and not with a follow focus, I actually like a shorter focus throw so you don't have to, crank the focus to get from the nearest focusing point back to infinity. This lens is built like a tank, and what I really like is that it's got the same kind of body design as the 15mm, with the aperture ring being above the focus ring. The mount is actually this graphite color, which I really like. So when you buy this lens, it's not gonna look like this. I have added a couple of things. Obviously lens cap, but then I have this luzzed brass 49 to 77mm step-up ring, which are my favorite step-up rings to get, really well built. And that just allows me to use all of my 77mm filters. So I can use my variable NDs, my mist filters on this lens. And then I've also added this focus gear. Quick side note, if you do have a lot of lenses and you wanna buy focus gears for your lenses, I would definitely recommend getting one of these. This is a digital caliper, and basically what you can do is measure the diameter of your lens so you can figure out the perfect focus ring to get for it. These are definitely pretty handy, and they're only like 5 or 10 bucks. So yeah, the focus ring that I have on this lens is by Tilta, and Tilta actually makes these focus rings in a bunch of different sizes, so you can get them basically for any lens that you have. So I have the focus ring on this lens, not necessarily to use it with a follow focus, but more so just as a physical marker so that when I'm focusing, I'm not gonna accidentally touch the aperture ring. So this 35mm lens actually gives a very pleasing look. With a lot of cheaper lenses like this, something that I've noticed is that there is a lot of chromatic aberration and purple fringing when you're opened wide up at the widest aperture. This 35mm at f1.4, you definitely can see a little bit of that, but definitely not as bad as some of the other cheap lenses that I've used. Stop it down to around f2 to f2.8, you don't really see that chromatic aberration as much. And as far as breathing is concerned, this lens does breathe a little bit, but honestly not as bad as I thought it was going to be. As you can see, when you focus the lens, it does extend a little bit. Let's talk about sharpness real quick. And honestly, the sharpness of a lens is not necessarily my biggest priority. With these 4K cameras, they can almost be a little bit too sharp. So having a little bit of a softer look with the lens actually can sometimes be desirable. And with cameras like my EM1 Mark II, I definitely think that this is almost too sharp of an image. So having a little bit of softness incorporated with a lens like this, I actually think helps out a little bit. Again, stop it down just a little bit and it's gonna be plenty sharp for anything that you're doing. And I would feel totally comfortable using this on even a paid gig. I think this lens has a lot of character, and the 35mm focal length is just really great on a Micro Four Thirds. If you came up in filmmaking like I did with the Canon T2i or T3i and you got the Canon Nifty 50, you can kind of think of this lens as your Canon Nifty 50. Kind of the same, tight portrait focal length, which I really like. This was definitely a focal length that I was kind of lacking. I had my 15mm, my 12 to 40, but I kind of wanted a really fast portrait lens, and I think this 35mm 35mm f1.4 Mark II by 7 Artisans is a great option. So if you'd like to check out this lens as well as the accessories that I've added to it, I'm gonna have links in the description below. If you like this video, please hit the like button. If you wanna see more of my videos, you can click right there. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I'll catch you all next time. Later.